Today on Rappler, President Aquino now says he's open to charter change and a second term as president. A Pulse Asia survey says most Filipinos don't understand the pork barrel corruption scandal. And an Asia expert says China needs to embrace the rise of its neighbors in Asia.
Hello, I'm Maria Ressa. Welcome to Rappler, your social news network. Reversing his position, President Benigno Aquino says he's now open to changing the Constitution, a move that allows him to run for a second term in office. In an interview with News 5, he said his clash with the Supreme Court led to this change of heart. Aquino said the balance between the three branches of government seems to be gone. He complained, Congress and the executive, we do our jobs, but anytime you can be castigated. He said the Supreme Court has too much power and is not practicing, in his words, judicial restraint. The president and the judiciary clashed after the High Court declared parts of the administration's spending program unconstitutional. The current constitution prohibits a president from re-election. It was drafted in 1987 under Aquino's late mother, Corazon. Aquino explained, "Of course, my bosses, I have to listen to them," referring to the Filipino people. Previous Philippine presidents, Fidel Ramos and Gloria Arroyo, also attempted to tinker with the charter, but failed. How are lawmakers reacting to this second term for President Aquino? Well, most echo party lines, but some administration allies are shaking their heads. Liberal Party members in the House welcome Aquino's proposal to revisit the parameters of judicial reach, while some approve the proposal to lift term limits. Oriental Mindoro Representative Reynaldo Umali says the president, quote, means well. He adds, 6 years is too short for a good president and too long for a bad one. But other Aquino allies do not want a second term. Valenzuela City Representative Sherwin Gatchalian says amending the Constitution to extend Aquino's term would be, in his words, political suicide. Critics, on the other hand, say Aquino's shift on charter change shows his true colors. Kabataan Representative Terry Ridon calls Aquino delusional. He adds, Mr. President, the calls for your re-election are coming from your own backyard. The vast majority of the Filipino people actually want you out. ACT Teachers Representative Antonio Tino compares Aquino to his predecessor, Gloria Arroyo, who reneged on her promise not to run for re-election in 2004. Tino says, this is Aquino's Arroyo moment. A Pulse Asia survey shows 9 out of 10 Filipinos know the people involved in the multi-billion peso pork barrel scam, but more than half know little about the corruption scandal itself. The survey shows 90% of Filipinos know about businesswoman Janet Lim Napoles, whistleblower Ben Hurluy, and the senators accused of colluding to divert public money. But 56% of respondents admit having little or no knowledge at all about details of the issue. Survey also shows public opinion is split on the believability or the credibility of the involvement of people in the scam. 34% of respondents say they believe some of those tagged by Napoles and Lui are believably involved, while 30% say most of those tagged are believably involved. 19% of respondents say all of those named are involved in the controversy, while only 4% believe none of those named are involved. Retired Major General Jovito Palparan files an urgent motion to remain at the National Bureau of Investigation, or NBI, where he's currently detained, citing security concerns. Palparan cites military intelligence reports that says an NPA liquidation squad is out to kill him. The United Nations Human Rights Office for Southeast Asia on Thursday stressed the importance of the Palparan case not only for the Philippines, but for the region. It says, ensuring justice will set an important precedent for the Philippines and Southeast Asia region where impunity remains. Rappler's Patricia Evangelista followed the story of the 2 missing University of the Philippines students and the military general who allegedly ordered their kidnapping. She looks back at the man and the myth and asks, is this the end of the legend of Palparan?
He inspired both fear and awe for more than a decade, called butcher by some, hero by others.
Nakikibaka sa kalaban si Jovito Palparan.
Jovito Palparan unified both sides. For the right, he was an incorruptible ideologue who whose iron fist crushed the plague of the world's longest-running communist insurgents.
Well, hopefully yung bansa natin maging matahimik kung wala ng insurgency, kung wala ng CPP, okay?
To the left, he was a power-hungry madman whose very brutality created a common enemy for moderates and progressives. Through it all, Jovito Palparan Jr. maintained an air of fearless competence, uncompromising and all but untouchable, in spite of the international outcry against the slaughter of dozens of left-wing activists. He promised to face the courts and let the law decide.
We are confident that we are not guilty. But as to the decision of the panel, we don't want to preempt their decision.
And yet when the courts decided, Palparan disappeared. For almost 3 years, he evaded arrest, adding to his legend, until his surprise capture in the slums of Santa Mesa.
Pag nagtago ka, nandun yung threat sa'yo anytime din eh. Pero, in control ka sarili mo. Diba? You can evade, you can ano. Pero nakakatakot dahil hindi ka makagalaw na, maliit lang ano mo, din palaging may apprehension ka. So, hindi. You cannot do things that you used to do.
Palparan, by his own admission, ran away because he was afraid of the same enemy he claimed to have crushed.
In public, may pronouncement sila na pag-retire ko pa lang, nakabanner na sa Enquirer by NPA na Palparan did man walking. So, by the NPA. So, that's a real threat. Totoo po yun. So, yun lang po ang nag-hold back sa akin.
This is not the Palparan of legend, not the giant that loomed in the national imagination. This is a man who failed because he was afraid. Patricia Evangelista, Rappler, Manila.
Former U.S. Ambassador to the Asian Development Bank, Curtis Chin, says both China and rival claimants to disputed territories need to step back. He says he fears some kind of accident may set off an escalation of conflict in the region. The Philippines, Vietnam, Japan, and South Korea are locked in separate conflicts with China. While Chin says the world is trying to adjust to China's rise, he says it's in China's interest to also embrace the rise of its neighbors.
My hope for China is that they will see it's also in their interest to work together with all their neighbors for a more prosperous region. You know, it's almost like Asia's version of the Game of Thrones. Contending powers, ancient history intrudes on modern times. And we'll see how the Game of Thrones, concludes in the book and TV series. But my hope is that that story here in this region will be one that will embrace China's rise, but China also needs to embrace the rest of Asia's rise.
In recent months, China has been aggressive in staking its claim over disputed waters. In response, the Philippines filed a historic case against China with an international tribunal. In Vietnam, a series of anti-China protests broke out in May after Beijing deployed an oil rig in waters also claimed by Hanoi. Chin says the Philippines' response against China is limited by its economic and military power. He adds, a strong military for the Philippines will benefit Asia.
I would love to have seen even a stronger response by the Philippines. But I also recognize that the Philippines is also constrained by its economy, by the state of its own military. So I think in the long run, and we're talking about long-term issues, the Philippines, United States, Asia will be better off with a stronger Philippines, one that's better able to finance a stronger military. And so when I looked at
With continuing regional tensions, Chin says building partnerships among countries is vital, particularly in ASEAN.
I think these are, perhaps in my lifetime, the most troubled times I've ever seen. But I read an article by a Newsweek columnist who argued that 5 decades ago or so, things were also very turbulent and a world in flux. And this was the Cold War period.
Yes.
Asia was still kind of recovering.
Yes.
Europe was still recovering. Contending forces around the world. But certainly, I'd say in these last 2 or 3 decades, clearly we have not seen a situation like this, which is why I think things like the U.S.-Philippines partnership are so vital.
Yes.
The U.S.-Thailand partnership.
Pope Francis arrives in Seoul Thursday for a 5-day visit. South Korea is Asia's fastest growing Roman Catholic community. The Vatican's Secretary of State, Cardinal Pietro Parolin, says the Pope will bring a message about the future of Asia and will use his trip to, quote, speak to all the countries on the continent. He will meet young Catholics for Asian Youth Day on Friday. Around 1 million people are expected to attend an open-air Mass Saturday to see Francis beatify 124 martyrs persecuted during the early days of the Korean Catholic Church. The Pope's visit will also feature a special reconciliation Mass for isolated neighbor North Korea. The United States says its troops found far fewer Yazidi refugees marooned on a northern Iraqi mountain and says an evacuation mission is, quote, far less likely. The United Nations Refugee Agency earlier said up to 30,000 civilians, most of them members of the Yazidi religious minority, remain trapped on Mount Sinjar after militants from the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or ISIS, launched a brutal offensive. But a special force of U.S. soldiers found the Yazidi were only in the thousands, not tens of thousands. Various countries ramp up efforts to help the trapped civilians, and Kurdish troops fighting the ISIS militants, with the U.S. launching a series of airstrikes since Friday. But the Pentagon says an evacuation mission isn't likely. A spokesman says the Yazidis who remain are in better condition than previously believed. Israel and Gaza militants uphold a new truce hours after the ceasefire got off to a shaky start Thursday. Early Thursday, Israeli jets bombed targets across Gaza in response to Palestinian rocket attacks hours after the two sides agreed to a 5-day ceasefire extension. More than 1,950 Palestinians and 67 people on the Israeli side have been killed in the conflict since July 8. After days of talks, Egypt successfully brokered what may be the longest period of calm in this 5-week conflict. But a Palestinian negotiator says more time is needed to discuss remaining disputes with Israel over a long-term truce. Let's now look at Rappler's Wrap for today, a list of the 10 most important events around the world you shouldn't miss. At number 6, Japan's economy shrinks 1.7% in the 3 months leading up to June as household and corporate spending slumped after Tokyo raised sales taxes. Millions of shoppers went on a buying binge on everything from cars and washing machines to televisions and alcohol before the increase on April 1. Demand fell sharply after prices went up. The decline emphasizes the challenges Tokyo faces to kickstart an economy long plagued by deflation and slow growth. And at number 9, Celine Dion cancels all her concerts to attend to her husband struggling with cancer. She was supposed to go on a tour in Asia with a stop in Manila on November 29th. Rene Angelil, Dion's husband, had a cancerous tumor removed last December. For the full top 10, visit Rappler.com's The Wrap. Every story on Rappler has a mood meter, which gives you 8 emotions to choose from. Click how you feel and your vote comes down to the mood navigator in the middle of the front page. That crowdsources the mood of the day. It also gives you the top 10 stories that have affected our readers and viewers the most emotionally. If you take a look, these 10 stories have gotten the most number of votes on their mood meter. We see here Aquino, very interesting shifts here. Aquino eyes charter change, and we see 38% happy and 49% angry, and yet a day later here, Aquino now open to charter change and a second term. Again, you can see this warring, 31% angry, 44% happy. What we've seen with the Aquino stories is really a back and forth from happy to angry, showing the two sides that are there. The story that has gotten the most number of votes in the last 24 hours is a religion story. INC and the mentality of exclusivity, contributed to Rappler by a citizen journalist, by somebody involved in it, and you see 9% sad, 53% inspired, pushing out the mood of the day. Today, most people are inspired. That is Rappler's Newscast for today, Thursday, August 14th, 2014. Visit Rappler.com and watch our newscast Monday to Friday. Tell us how you feel on our mood meter and help us crowdsource the mood of the day. I'm Maria Ressa. As we say at Rappler, tomorrow begins today.